On August 3, 2012, three friends signed a backcountry permit at the Marrow Peak Ranger Station near the Sawtooth Wilderness in Central. Their names were Elena Brooks, Maya Collins, and Hannah Reed. They were all 19. The plan was simple. 5 days, one loop trail, alpine lakes, late summer snowfields, and a final night under the stars before college scattered them across the country. That's what the paperwork said. That's what their families believed. And for the first 48 hours, nothing seemed wrong. But this is a story that begins like many others, and then becomes something else entirely. The Sawtooth backcountry is deceptive. On the surface, it's postcard perfect blue lakes, white granite, silence that feels clean. Underneath, it's a maze. No cell service, trails that vanish into scree, weather that turns without warning. Rangers will tell you that people don't disappear here because of one big mistake. They disappear because of a series of small ones. A wrong turn, a shortcut, a decision made when you're tired and thirsty and convinced you're still in control. Elena Brooks was the one who believed in control. According to friends, she planned everything. Days printed, calories counted, water weighed. She was headed to Boston in the fall on an engineering scholarship and treated this hike like a final exam she intended to ace. Maya Collins, by contrast, treated it like a goodbye party. She brought a disposable camera, a battered journal, and insisted on stopping every 20 minutes to take photos. Hannah Reed stayed mostly quiet. People described her as agreeable, watchful, the one who followed rather than led, the one who stayed behind while the others talked. At 9:14 a.m., a ranger noted their departure in the logbook. 3 packs, 1 red tent, 1 white's UV left at the Iron Creek trailhead. Due back August 8th, they were seen once more that day by another hiking group near Elktooth Pass. The witness later told investigators the girls looked calm but focused. No panic, no argument. Elena was checking a map. Maya was laughing about something. Hannah stood slightly apart, adjusting the straps on her pack. Nothing about them stood out. And then they dropped below the tree line and vanished. When August 8th came and went, the ranger station waited until nightfall. That was protocol. By the next morning, Elena's mother had already called twice. Maya's father drove up from Twin Falls and stood in the parking lot staring at the SUV, still locked, still dusty, exactly where it had been left. When a mother pleads for help and gets little more than a shrug, you have to ask why. But in this case, the response was fast. By noon on August 9th, search and rescue was airborne. Helicopters swept the basins. Ground teams followed the planned route. Dogs worked the trailhead until heat and granite erased the scent. The weather was brutal. High pressure. No clouds. Afternoon temperatures spiked well above average. Searchers checked water sources first, then campsites, then the places people fall, ledges, chutes, the quiet corners where sound doesn't travel. On the 3rd day, a volunteer found something near a dry creek bed west of Alder Lake, a teal knit headband. Maya Collins' mother identified it immediately. She had knitted it herself the previous winter. The headband lay alone on a flat stone. No footprints nearby, no pack, no blood. It looked ordinary, but it wasn't. It meant the girls had come farther than expected, and then stopped. Authorities floated theories quickly. Dehydration, disorientation, a fall into a ravine that hadn't been searched yet. Some believe they tried to bushwhack toward water. Others suggested wildlife, though there was no sign of a struggle. Unbelievably, there was also quiet talk of a voluntary disappearance. That idea died fast. These were teenagers with plans, futures, people waiting for them. This wasn't a runaway story. This was a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. After 10 days, the search scaled back. By day 14, it was labeled recovery focused. By the end of August, The Sawtooth wilderness swallowed the case whole. No bodies, no equipment, no final campsite. Just one abandoned SUV and a headband bleaching in the sun. Then, on September 6th, everything changed. At 3:27 p.m., a seasonal road crew was clearing debris along State Route 75, nearly 60 miles from the trailhead. One worker noticed movement near the tree line. At first, he thought it was an animal. Then he saw hands. A girl emerged from the brush, barefoot, clothes torn, hair shaved down to raw skin. She collapsed onto the asphalt and didn't speak. Not at first. Her name was Hannah Reed. Paramedics described her condition as catastrophic: severe dehydration, advanced muscle wasting, and sun damage so extensive it resembled chemical burns. Her scalp was infected, marked by dozens of thin, shallow cuts. She weighed barely 90 pounds. It took nearly a full day before she could answer questions, and when she did, what she said sent shockwaves through the county. Hannah claimed that on the third day of their hike, a man approached them near a creek. He introduced himself as a surveyor and warned that the marked springs ahead were dry. He offered to lead them to another water source. According to Hannah, they followed him into a narrow ravine. That's where he pulled a gun. That's where everything fell apart. She described being held in a concealed shelter for weeks. Rituals, punishments, forced fasting. Their hair shaved as cleansing. She said Elena was taken first, then Maya. Hannah claimed she escaped only because the man forgot to secure her restraints after drinking himself unconscious. The media seized on the story immediately. Headlines warned of a mountain predator. Sketches were released. Tips flooded in. Rangers searched the forest again, this time for a man. But there was a problem. No shelter was found. No weapon. No footprints. No sign anyone else had ever been there. And beneath the horror of Hannah's story, another question pulsed quietly, waiting to be asked. If she had escaped from deep wilderness, how did she reach the road at all? Because the terrain between Alder Lake and State Route 75 isn't just difficult. It's vertical, cliffs, deadfall, miles of untracked forest. Even experienced climbers don't move through it quickly. And Hannah, according to doctors, could barely stand. On the surface, she was a miracle. Underneath, something didn't fit. If Hannah Reed's story was true, then she had done the impossible. And if it wasn't, then something far worse had happened in the Sawtooths. By mid-September 2012, Hannah was still hospitalized in Boise, guarded quietly by deputies who never spoke to the press. Officially, it was for her protection. Unofficially, it was because investigators didn't know what to do with her. She was the only living link to Elena Brooks and Maya Collins, the only voice from the wilderness. And yet, almost immediately, cracks began to form. It started with a lab report. No one paid attention to at first. As part of standard intake, doctors ran a toxicology screen when Hannah arrived. Dehydration explained most of what they saw: ketones, electrolyte imbalance, muscle breakdown. But buried at the bottom of the report, in a line that didn't trigger alarms at the time, was a metabolite linked to a modern prescription sedative. Not alcohol, not plant-based compounds, not anything you'd expect from someone allegedly drinking Muddy Creek water and herbal mixtures brewed by a feral captor. This drug was specific, expensive, prescription only, known for inducing deep sleep and, more troublingly, short-term amnesia. At the time, doctors assumed it came from treatment. It didn't. The blood draw happened before medication was administered. That detail sat dormant for years. In 2016, when the case was quietly reopened by the Idaho Cold Case Review Unit, a detective named Aaron Wells noticed it. He wasn't looking for a smoking gun. He was looking for patterns, similar cases, familiar mistakes. And the more he reread Hannah's original statements, the more uneasy he became. Her descriptions were vivid, selectively so. She could recall exact phrases spoken by the alleged captor, his rituals, his tone, his beliefs. But when pressed on practical details, distances, directions, landmarks, her answers dissolved. She wasn't sure. She thought so. She might be wrong. Trauma can do that, of course. But trauma usually erases chaos, not geography. Wells began where he always did. Paper. Receipts. On September 14, 2012, 2 days before the hike, Elena Brooks' debit card was used at a sporting goods store in Ketchum. Standard purchases. Fuel canisters. Trail meals. 5 days worth of food. Nothing unusual. Maya Collins' purchases matched that pattern almost exactly. And Wells found a third receipt. Same store. Same day. But this purchase wasn't on Elena's card. It was logged under a loyalty account registered to Hannah Reed. Paid in cash. The list was different. Freeze-dried meals. High-calorie ration bars. 30 days worth. Not variety packs. Identical items, chosen for efficiency, not enjoyment. Alongside them, extra fuel tablets, water purification tabs far exceeding normal needs, and a pack of disposable razors with replacement blades. It was strange, but strange isn't proof. Until Wells compared it to the surveillance footage from the Iron Creek trailhead. The video had been reviewed dozens of times in 2012, but only for one thing: which direction the girls went. In 2016, Wells watched it differently. He watched how they moved, how they lifted their packs. Elena and Maya slid theirs on easily. Hannah struggled. Her pack was enormous, taller than her torso, stuffed so tight it bulged at the seams. She leaned forward just to stand upright. Experts later estimated its weight at nearly 60 pounds. For a 5-day hike, that made no sense. Unless someone wasn't planning to come back. The next question was the escape. According to Hannah, she fled from a hidden shelter near the upper Alder Basin, ran through the night, and reached State Route 75 in less than 48 hours. Rangers had questioned that claim early on, but without evidence to contradict her, it was set aside. Wells decided to test it. He brought in terrain specialists, SAR veterans, a geologist who knew the Sawtooths intimately. They mapped the route Hannah described: elevation gain, vegetation density, cliff bands, dead zones. The conclusion was unanimous. It couldn't be done. Not by a healthy adult, not in daylight, and absolutely not by someone in Hannah's physical condition. The area between Alder Lake and Route 75 is cut by sheer granite walls and avalanche chutes. Even knowing the terrain, moving through it requires technical skill. One misstep is fatal. A controlled experiment was attempted. A professional climber, fully rested, equipped, and guided, attempted a night ascent in the same zone. After 3 hours, he stopped. It was too dangerous to continue. Then came the medical overlay. At the time Hannah was found, she was suffering from advanced muscle atrophy. Doctors noted she could barely walk 10 steps without assistance. Her heart rate spiked dangerously under mild exertion. The idea that she had climbed thousands of feet over broken terrain defied basic physiology. So, Wells asked the question no one had dared to ask in 2012. What if Hannah never went down into the basin at all? What if she stayed above? The Sawtooth Plateau isn't empty. It's forested, uneven, full of hidden depressions and natural shelters. A person with supplies could disappear there for weeks without being seen, especially while search teams focused their efforts far below, along lakes and creeks. And suddenly, other details shifted into focus. Why were no restraints ever found? Why was no shelter discovered despite exhaustive searches? Why did Hannah's injuries look controlled? A forensic dermatologist re-examined her hospital photos. The cuts on her scalp were shallow, parallel. Most strikingly, they followed angles consistent with self-infliction, especially along the back of the head, where an attacker would struggle to reach cleanly. These were hesitation marks, careful, repeated, not the work of a frenzied captor. Then there was Hannah's past. Friends described her as quiet, attached, intensely loyal to Elena and Maya. Teachers recalled incidents that, at the time, seemed insignificant. A middle school play where Maya got the lead role, and her costume was found shredded hours before opening night. No proof, no consequences. But Hannah had been nearby, calm, almost relieved when the performance was canceled. Wells obtained a warrant to search Hannah's apartment in Phoenix, where she had relocated quietly after recovery. In a storage box labeled school, they found a notebook, a diary. The entries from spring 2012 were unsettling. She wrote about being left behind, about time moving forward without her, about needing to freeze things before they break. One line appeared again and again, underlined so hard the paper tore. We have to stay the same forever. That was motive. The final piece was digital. Cell tower data placed. Hannah's phone supposedly lost in the wilderness, pinging intermittently near the plateau for weeks after the disappearance. Not consistently. Just enough to suggest it had power and signal. She had been listening to the search helicopters, waiting. When Wells finally sat across from Hannah in an interview room in late 2017, he didn't accuse her. He didn't raise his voice. He laid the evidence out slowly. Receipts, maps, medical reports, photos. And when he asked her one question, just one, her mask slipped. "If you were held captive below," he said quietly, "where did you shave your head the second time?" Hannah didn't cry. She looked up, calm, clear, and smiled. Hannah Reed didn't deny it. She didn't confess either. She simply stopped pretending. The room went quiet after Detective Wells asked his question. No threats, no raised voices. Just paper on a metal table, and a truth that no longer had anywhere to hide. Hannah leaned back in her chair, studied the ceiling vent like it annoyed her, and asked for a glass of water. Her hands were steady. Too steady. That was the moment Wells later said he understood. This wasn't a broken survivor cracking under pressure. This was someone adjusting the script. What came next wasn't cinematic. It was worse. Over 6 hours, Hannah spoke slowly, carefully. She corrected Wells when he mispronounced trail names, clarified dates, framed everything as necessity. According to her, the plan hadn't begun as murder. It began as insurance. She admitted buying food, razors, pills, unsure if she would use them. The hike, she said, was a test, a last chance to see if Elena and Maya would choose her when there was nowhere else to go. They failed the test on the second night. By the fire near Alder Lake, they laughed, spoke of dorms and internships. Hannah felt herself disappearing. That was when she decided they would not leave her. Not now. Not ever. She crushed pills into their cocoa. When the sedatives took hold, she used plastic ties she had packed. No blood, no struggle, no screaming. Later, she said she wanted it quiet, respectful. Afterward, she dragged the bodies to a fissure she'd marked months earlier on a topographic map. A narrow crack hidden under moss and branches, deep enough that light and sound vanished. She lowered Elena and Maya inside, dropped their packs after them, and erased the fire ring, scattered footprints, and walked away as if nothing happened. For the next 28 days, Hannah lived less than a mile from the main search zone. She stayed in a shallow hollow under fallen trees, sleeping in a tent camouflaged with pine boughs. She rationed food, letting herself weaken. She shaved her head and cut shallow lines to feign injury. At night, she listened to helicopters overhead. During the day, she watched volunteers pass within yards, never looking down. She waited until the search slowed, until hope thinned, until the story needed a survivor. Then she stepped onto the road. When Detective Wells later asked why she came back at all, Hannah looked genuinely puzzled. Someone had to tell the story, she said. Otherwise, they'd just fade. To her, this wasn't loss. It was preservation. Elena and Maya wouldn't forget her, wouldn't outgrow her, wouldn't leave. The arrest warrants were issued quietly. No press conference, no public statements. Authorities moved fast, aware of how volatile the truth would be. Hannah was taken into custody without resistance. As she was let out, she asked only one question: whether the plateau would still be quiet in the fall. The recovery operation began 3 days later. Guided by Hannah, rangers cut through dense brush on the western edge of the plateau. To anyone else, it looked like nothing, just stone and scrub. But beneath it was the fissure, a vertical scar in the earth, invisible unless you knew exactly where to stand. Technical climbers descended at first light. They found the remains on a narrow ledge 40 meters down. Elena Brooks and Maya Collins lay close together, skeletal, tangled in straps and fabric. Their packs were nearby, preserved by darkness. Maya's journal was recovered, pages fused together, the final entry unfinished. Cause of death was ligature strangulation. No evidence of a third party. No animals. The families were notified that afternoon. A community that had spent 5 years fearing a monster in the wilderness was forced to accept something far worse, that the danger had been familiar all along. Hannah Reed was sentenced to life without parole. The mountains aren't visible from her prison yard. And the most unsettling question isn't how she survived, but how close she was the entire time, and how easily everyone believed the wrong story.